We call the meeting to order. Thank you. Welcome to the Woking Borough Council Planning Committee meeting of the 25th of March. Before we start, there's a few housekeeping matters we just need to cover, procedural issues. We use a public address system this evening, which hopefully, could you at the back indicate you can hear us all okay? Good, thank you. Silent. There's no fire drill plan, so if the fire alarms go off, just do what I do.
Running screen.
Just a couple of other things we have to cover. The planning committee is made up of 9 elected borough councillors. We're supported tonight by a variety of professional council officers. On my almost far right is Mary Severin. Could you just indicate Mary? Mary is the borough solicitor who's here to give us general legal advice. Next to her is Haroon Khan, who's the solicitor responsible for drawing up all the legal agreements connected with these applications. Next to him is Susan Coulter, who's the Senior Democratic Services Officer. She is clerk to tonight's meeting. Then on my immediate right is Councillor Tim Holton, who's the Vice Chairman. I'm Simon Weeks, I chair the committee. And on my left is Mark Cupid, who's the Delivery Programme Director for these applications. Next to him is Chris Easton, who's the Service Manager for Highways Development, who's here to advise us on all highways, rights of way and transport matters. And the Planning Officer presenting tonight will be Matt Melville, who's sitting there. He's presenting the first application. And then to my left and right are the other members of the 9 members of the Planning Committee who will consider each application. The Planning Committee is quasi-judicial. We have formal and set procedures and would ask you to cooperate with those, please. Firstly, the Planning Officer will present the application in detail, and then I will call in turn only those who have pre-registered to speak. If you could come to the table here at the front, press the grey button when you're asked to speak and the microphone is on. As you know, each category of speaker, we normally allow 3 minutes, but because of the size and scale of interest in this application, we're allowing 6 minutes. Therefore, if there's 2 or 3 people sharing that 6 minutes, please manage your time, because if the first person uses 5.5 minutes, the other person's only got 30 seconds to get their points across. In order to try and assist in that, I will probably indicate when the 1 minute remains of your allocated 6 minutes to enable you to either speed up or slow down depending on how you're getting on. Okay, members of the committee, I must stress, are interested in the quality of what you have to say rather than the quantity. So please don't feel obliged to use all the allocated time. And I must emphasise only those that are pre-registered to speak may speak. No other person, parish councillor, borough councillor, objectors, supporters, agents, applicants are permitted to address the committee or ask questions or interrupt the meeting. That is why we've had a very protracted consultation period in preceding months for people to be able to get questions posed and hopefully get answers. Okay. Once that's completed, the committee will then deliberate the application. We will seek clarification on any points that we are clear about, and we will then strive to reach a decision, which may or may not agree with the officer's recommendation. Finally, a reminder that as the local planning authority, our role is to consider a valid planning application against prevailing national and local planning policy. It is not our role to consider whether an application is a good idea, whether it's in the right place, whether the applicant is a suitable person to be making the application, whether you have alternative schemes. That is not the role of the planning committee. We're being asked to consider what is before us tonight. So thank you for listening to me on that. We now move straight on to the main items in the agenda. So the first application is a hybrid application for, sorry, I just checked, sorry, there are no apologies, that's what I do need to check that. Do any members have any form of interest that they need to declare on this application? Okay, in that case we'll move straight on to the application, which is a hybrid application. This is the application for 2,000 new dwellings as part of the SDL site centred on Barking, Richardson, Swallowville and Arthur. So without further ado, we'll head straight across to Matt Melville, the planning officer, who's worked on this scheme more or less since the outset.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to give you a bit of overview about the Arkfield Garrison hybrid planning application, which has been submitted by the Arkfield Garrison Landowners Committee, which is principally Chris Nicholson. So I'm just going to start with a bit of context, policy context, and then an explanation of how the proposals have evolved. And I'm going to touch upon the master plan, what's informed the master plan, then tell you a bit about some of the infrastructure that's going to be delivered with this application. And then going to touch upon some other issues which I feel are relevant to the determination of this application. Then pass over to my colleague Chris, who will give you an overview of the highways package to be delivered with the application, and then conclude with an explanation of the recommendation and an explanation of the updates on the update sheet which has been circulated around the room. So the Arkfield Garrison's strategic development location is allocated through the core strategy for around 3,500 homes. This application is in the north of the Arkfield Garrison SDL, and within the Council's adopted supplementary planning document was identified to accommodate about 2,000 dwellings, a district centre, a neighbourhood centre, a secondary school and a primary school. The principle of this development has therefore already been established through the core strategy and supplementary planning document. So the green line in this plan here shows the SDL boundary. This is the application site, so it's principally in the north of the SDL with a smaller area for Sands in the south. And the area in blue is Hogwood Farm, where there's currently another application has been submitted, but has yet to be determined, which proposes another 1,500 dwellings. So the two applications together form the total allocation for the whole strategic development location. So this proposal, in outline, is for up to 2,000 dwellings, a 1,500 place secondary school, a new primary school, a district centre and neighbourhood centre with retail and community uses, a community facility, and sports pitches, green spaces, allotments, areas, and those types of things. In full, there are 2 areas of strategic alternative natural green space, which developers are obliged to deliver in this local authority area to mitigate the impact upon the special protection area. The access junctions, and also they're seeking reuse of the existing MOD gymnasium on the site. So, matter for consideration is the principle of the uses and the development parameters in terms of locations for the uses, the maximum heights of buildings and densities, and for the elements in full, the SAMs, the site access and the gym, then the full detail of those proposals can be considered. In time, reserve matters applications will follow for the site, which will provide detailed design, appearance and landscaping and drainage of the proposals. So it would be helpful just to have an overview of how the process have evolved, because in the last 2.5 years we've been working Borough Council. It's become quite a journey with the Arkfield Garrison SDL, and I thought it would be helpful to explain that to you to give you some context. So at the end of 2013, the previous application which had been submitted on this site was withdrawn. The Council had particular concerns about the technical evidence underpinning the application, the flood risk assessment, the deficient tree survey, concerns about the infrastructure package being offered, and also some issues about the design and the master plan, and in particular the district centre and the way that we felt that should look as a place. The application also had objections from Natural England, the Environment Agency and Sport England. So, since that time there's been extensive new technical work undertaken. There's been a new flood risk assessment, a tree survey identifying all 3,500 trees across the site, ecological surveys, land quality surveys, and a comprehensive new transport assessment, which has been worked up with the developers in the south as well. So it comprehensively takes into account the impact of the whole SDL, and also included consultation with the neighbouring local authorities. There's also been further engagement, both with the public, but also with technical consultees as well. The developers have attended community forums and also the community steering group meetings, which the council organises with the local parish councils and the local ward members to discuss the detail of the proposals within the site. The proposals have also been design reviewed as well. The council organised a joint design review for both this site and the Hogwood Farm site together. So the independent design panel to consider how both proposals mesh together. And all this work has helped to inform the planning application before us today. So in terms of the planning application, it came into us at the end of last year, and we consulted almost 10,000 homes and businesses in the local area. We had about 220 objections, principally focused on highways, issues of design, impact for existing residents, and comments about flooding and how the infrastructure would cope as well. Since the first round of consultation, we've had the developers amended the proposals to take account of many of these concerns. These include revisions to the transport assessment, with some different off-site junctions, which I'm sure Chris will talk about further later. Some clarifications to the environment statement, particularly in regard to the flood risk assessment. Some amendments to the master plan to reduce the height of the buildings in some of the most sensitive areas and to improve some of the green connectivity both across the development site and connecting down to Hogwood Farm in the south. And some further information about the character areas that will be created. I'm going to touch upon those in a bit more detail later. So the master plan is principally informed by sort of two elements: an understanding of the site's opportunities and constraints, and the vision for the development. So the opportunities and constraints are informed by the environment statement, which we often refer to as the building block of the application. The environment statement includes all the technical studies, the landscape and visual impact assessment, the tree surveys, the flood work, the impact assessments of the heritage and so forth. And all these come together to build a picture of the opportunities and constraints on the site. The environment statement not only looks at the impacts from this development, it looks at the impacts from the wider cumulative impact as well. So the environment statement has taken into account where the issues are relevant, the impact of this development and the development of Hogwood Farm. We had the environment statement independently reviewed, and the consultants have come back to us and told us it is technically sound. The council's vision for the development evolves from the core strategy, the supplementary planning document. I thought it was just helpful to put this in here because it just brings out some of the key attributes that we think should come forward in the development. So, mixing town and country, flexible infrastructure, strong communities, integrated green infrastructure, sustainable travel, unique heritage and taking advantage of the unique heritage and landscape setting to create a modern, healthy, community-led development. The developers' vision in their documents are garden city principles, or garden village principles, perhaps more relevant in this case, which go back to many of the same principles about bringing together the best of town and country, the importance of green space, building communities, and having integrated and accessible transport networks. And you see in the committee report that the application is assessed against the development plan, but also reference is made to how the proposals relate to these garden city principles as well. So the master plan, some slightly strange colours there, but the master plan is informed by all this work which has just gone before, and the framework is built around the green infrastructure, including the linear park, which runs from west to east, so from the A57 up to the lake in the northeastern corner, and it's very much shaped by the green infrastructure. And if we had all the trees marked on there, you see the treed areas as well. Building heights. These have been informed by the landscape and visual impact assessment. As I previously said, amended plans have been received to reduce the height of development from most sensitive locations. So up adjacent to Commonfield Lane, the northeastern corner of the site, and also closest to the existing residence around Shearlands Road, where the height of development has been lowered to 2 stories. Across the site, there's a maximum height of 3 stories to retain the village character, which we're seeking to achieve on the development. In terms of density, the average density across the site is 32 to 33 dwellings per hectare, which is within the range suggested by the core strategy, which is between 30 and 35. As you can see, there is variation across the site, with the greatest density around the district centre in the south of the development, and the neighbourhood centre in the north. And having these varieties in density helps to create character and legibility to the development. This plan shows the principal streets proposed in the development, based around the existing roads of Biggs Lane, Princess Margaret Drive and Shearlands Road, and the new 9-mile road extension which comes in from the western boundary of the A337 across and through, and will connect afterwards into the Hogwood Farm site. And in terms of phasing, the dark red is the first phase coming forward. But this phasing plan gives us an indicative strategy for phasing, further details of the housing delivery and the infrastructure, and what's going to be put forward when is secured by one of the conditions in the report. And there's an illustrative master plan bringing together all those elements in terms of how it might look, but it is just illustrative. The application is also supported by a design access statement. And this is a really important document because it provides a framework for the reserve matters applications going forward. It identifies 7 character areas, which I'll just one in a minute. And for each of those, identifies the key opportunities and constraints which development in those areas needs to respond to. For each of those character areas as well, there's a high-level design code as well, and I'll show you some examples of that. Within that document, there's also a commitment that reserve matters will meet the council's residential, amenity and car parking standards to ensure that the quality of the development meets our expectations. So the plan on the screen here shows the 7 different character areas, which is based upon understanding of what's there now, and also the distinctive new character that we want to create in that part of the site. To create a high quality, legible development with different character areas across the site. Here's an example just of one character area of the type of assessment in that document, where it's looked at the opportunities and constraints of that particular area, the trees, the heritage, not in this case but in other cases, relationship with existing development, and it's interpreted a design response on the right hand side. And this is provided a framework for reserve matters applications going forward. There's also some high-level design coding as well for each of the areas to maintain individual characters in those different parts of the site. So I'm sure you can't read any of the text on the screen here, but it's those principles how some parts of the site might have a more formal appearance and how that will manifest itself in the development going forward. And other parts of the site will be more informal, the design will be looser and less regular. So the design code sets out some very helpful indicators of how the reserve matters applications are likely to look on the site. It also includes information about the street hierarchy as well. So on one of the previous diagrams I showed you the different size streets across the site, and it provides information about the different streets, what they're going to look like, to create legible neighbourhoods, so that when you know you're on the major street going through the site, and he doesn't say you're going to a minor residential road, you get completely lost. So it's important to have a very legible street hierarchy as well. I thought just very quickly touch upon development briefs, because much of the planning conditions, many pages in there, filled up with information about development briefs. Because the council is seeking more detail in some of the most important parts of the site, which can be worked up at a later date, and the requirement is that work is done in consultation with the local community. So it's particularly sensitive areas like the district centre, the neighbourhood centre, the primary school, around the heritage assets, around the scheduled moat, to make sure that development is carefully planned in those areas to take account of what's most important. Just to touch upon very briefly, the district centre area, for example, there's lots going on here. There's the district centre with a distinct idea of how we want that place to be shaped, but there's also the scheduled infirmary stables as well. There's the green spaces, lots of things to balance and bring together. And by having a single development brief for that area, it helps that judgment to be made in a more comprehensive and joined up way. In terms of infrastructure delivery, the application was submitted with a infrastructure delivery plan identifying the contributions, how the development contributes to the overall delivery package of the SDL, and the council has agreed Section 106 contributions with the developer to a value of about £28,000 per dwelling. Just to run through quickly what these involve, in terms of highways, that's strategic highway contributions towards the highway works and a range of corridors coming away from the site, and Chris will tell you more about those. The greenways, public transport subsidy, public transport within the site and bus stops, and My Journey travel planning, which I'm sure Chris will tell you more about. There's affordable housing as well. Education, there's a primary school on the site, secondary school, and early years providers. The council's not only seeking to re-provide existing early years providers on the site, but also to safeguard the site for extra provision as well. The new community facility, a healthcare site, base payments towards a community manager, sports halls, swimming pools, cemeteries, all sorts of on-site infrastructure being delivered, allotments, play areas, pitches, and a new pavilion, with payments towards their future maintenance, SANs and contribution and payment towards strategic access, monitoring and maintenance, which is a requirement in relation to the SPA, contributions toward country parks and countryside access. So it's quite a comprehensive infrastructure package that we've secured. Just to touch upon some other particularly pertinent issues, many of which have sort of risen as prominent through consultation. Extensive work has been undertaken on the flooding and modelling all the watercourses across the site. Flood risk assessment and drainage strategy have been agreed by the Environment Agency and by working Borough Council's experts. This means that development will be flood safe and not increase flooding off-site. And there's a comprehensive set of conditions within the report, and including these, is a requirement to have details of their phasing and their maintenance as well going forward. In terms of heritage assets, I alluded to the significant heritage assets on the site. There's 2 scheduled monuments, one Grade 2 listed building within the site. The developers made a commitment to restore the infirmary stables, which you might be able to see from the picture there, is currently in a state of disrepair and requires urgent attention. We're securing details to make sure the buildings be retained and protected and interpreted. We are also requiring archaeological surveys in agreement with, in accordance with agreed programme of work as well. In terms of SPA mitigation, the strategy being agreed with Natural England, there's two areas of SAM across the site as a contribution towards SAM, and Natural England are happy with the SAM proposals put forward. Just to touch upon a couple other matters, the environment statement identifies no significant environmental impact, and where there are impacts they can be mitigated. So, for example, protection of ecology through safeguarding dark corridors for bats. Significant trees and hedgerows will be retained and protected. There will be no significant impact on neighbouring amenities, and the detailed design and layout will come forward through the reserve matters applications, but with the parameters set out in the design access statement. The green infrastructure and community provision meets or even exceeds the council standards. As I said before, there's a commitment to comply with the council's adopted standards, which provide further reassurances about the impact upon neighbour amenities. And the development will have good sustainability credentials within the conditions. There's a requirement for a certain portion of low carbon energy to be generated on the site, and for the development to reach Code Sustainable Homes Level 4. And I'm handing over to Chris to talk about highways.
Evening. I noticed there's a few slides that Matt has used, which I've also used, so there'll be a repetition, unfortunately. Basically here we have the adopted SPD plan, which obviously demonstrates the site accesses as well. Then we move down into a bit more detail of the site layout, which also includes the red line boundary around the edge, which shows obviously the SDL boundary. From that we move down a little bit further so we can see the street hierarchy and the roads within the site. And here, as you can see, there's the access in the bottom left corner, which shows the access from the 327. We've also got Biggs Lane, Anglican access to the northwest, sorry. And then we've got the main existing route running through Biggs Lane, the Princess Marina Drive, leading through to Everston, through to Shearlands Road, which leads down to the south, down to the A327. The street hierarchy, this is one of the areas we've seen today, which you may not be able to read fully. Sets out the street hierarchy and the parameters for the primary streets, secondary streets, down through the tertiary. And here is an indicative example. Now through here, the primary streets, and indeed maybe on some of the secondary, depending on where the bus routes will be leading, the minimum width is 6.1 metres to ensure that buses can circulate through the site simultaneously passing another bus should the routes obviously go down that road. And this is required as a minimum standard, and will also be the minimum standard for the Narmore Ride extension leading from the A327 down through to the Narmore Ride to the east. Here is a demonstration of the junctions being provided on the A327, and this is the access that leads into the site. And here's the improved access at the Langley Common Lane Junction. Now this is an improved and changed from the first iteration that was submitted with the application, which had a design that obviously caused a bit of concern to a few people, including ourselves. We've worked with the developers and the highways consultants to come up with this revised scheme, which improves the layout significantly. We also showed the wider plan here because it also includes the subway which exists, and this will be replaced with an at-grade signalised crossing, which is a significant improvement in the area. So basically, how we assess the application, the Wokingham Strategic Transport Model is a very good model. We have, and I'll go into a bit more detail shortly, we then define the study area, we set out the scoping, and we identify junctions that we assess or obviously scope out of the assessment. We then undertake traffic surveys at these identified locations, and then we undertake an assessment of these junctions to determine local mitigation. So the model, it was built, has a base year of 2010, it has two forecast years of 2017 and 2026. The base year was validated to a very high standard and beyond actually the expectation of the DFT's requirements. We have three scenarios within each of the forecast years. We have scenario A, which is all development outside of the borough but not including those internally within the SDLs. Then scenario B, which adds to scenario A by applying the SDL developments on top. And then scenario C adds another layer on top by adding all the transport interventions on top of all the identified SDL infrastructure. And the plot in the corner there just shows a kind of an extract of what is submitted from the outputs of the model. So in terms of Arborfield, we work with the high-risk consultants to understand and develop the study area. So we started off with the core SDL area, identified the AGLC, as well as the MOT, because a lot of this work was done, as Matt mentioned, together with all high-risk consultants. We then identified the key corridor routes, and obviously there are the 6 shown on this study area here. Following that, we, having identified the corridors and key junctions, we undertake traffic surveys in all of these to validate either the model or to identify what changes may have also happened between 2010 and the base year assessments that were undertaken 2013-14 through to now. All the raw data is provided to the council for us to obviously use and validate against the model to ensure that the model is as robust as required to be. So moving on to the next part and looking at the local junctions themselves. So here, for example, we have the Langley Common Biggs Lane junction. So a junction following the outputs and the local junction assessments, we identify the flows and the design engineer will come up with a design scheme. We have had a few, obviously, as I mentioned, a few scheme ideas put forward for this junction. In this essence, this one here has obviously been assessed and been improved from a priority junction to a signalised junction. There's a range of flows and figures in the bottom corner, which demonstrate the significant improvement. The base year 14, no development 2026, and 2026 with development, they were all the priority junction as stood, and then the 2026 with the roundabout, you can clearly see that there's a significant improvement taking the Biggs Lane junction, for example, in the AMP. With development 2026 as a priority junction as it stood, had an RFC of 1.36, 0.85 is what we obviously deem to kind of seek. With the roundabout improvement, that comes down to 0.56, which is significant, demonstrating that junction works sufficiently with the development in the future years. So in terms of mitigation, we've looked at the A327 corridor, Barkham Road, Common Lane, Comford Lane, Finchampstead and Armour Ride, the B3030 Minish, Reading Road, Farley Hill, Greenways, public transport, My Journey, travel planning and the construction traffic elements. So this is to the north of the application site, which is the Alton Cross Relief Road. It's recently been out for consultation. It's been worked up in finer detail, and this is the latest design options that we have in front of us. A significant sum of money has been secured through the Section 106 of this application to assist in delivering this, and we've worked to deliver the funding triggers at the appropriate time to enable the council to deliver this road at the required time. Here we've got an identified scheme, which is Barkham Bridge, which many people will know is currently a pinch point on the network, and this provides a significant safety improvement to allow for two-way free-flowing traffic. Now the scheme has been identified within the existing public highway, and moving forward through the Section 106 negotiations with the applicant, we've determined that the cost identified for this scheme will be taken by the council to deliver this scheme as a minimum, or an improvement scheme which would require third-party land. So therefore the applicant has demonstrated in terms of its application that it meets its requirements, But in terms of the council, there may be improvements that obviously residents and members of parish councils have desired, so we can take that money to look at further schemes. Commonfield Land is another one. There's been various iterations that have gone through the assessment of the application. The scheme that's put before us here is it's local widening and passing places being provided along the length. Now, the requirement here again is it meets the requirements of the application. However, again, because there's requirements of some of the residents, there's potential for additional land for further improvements to be made in this area. The scheme that's put before us here is requirement and mitigates the scheme put in front of us. However, through Section 106, again, taking on board those comments that have been raised, we've taken the Section 106 contributions to identify are there further schemes that can be delivered. If it's identified that there's not, then this is the scheme which will be implemented. Barnwell Ride and California Crossroads. This has been a kind of a sticky point for many people and many residents living in the Finch Hampstead area for some period of time. Through assessments, it's identified that purely the constraints at this junction are typically down to 2 hours of the day, and it does operate quite well outside of those hours. Through, again, the assessments here, we've decided that rather than to allow the developers to deliver a scheme that purely just mitigates that requirement of the application and may not give full consideration to what the residents and local members wish, we've set up a working group, and we have already had our first meeting, which included the developers, the local residents, the parish, local employers, landowners, to discuss what the best options are. In respect of this, we've decided, and the residents through that group and the stakeholders group, that we will take a sum of money to allow for that work to continue to deliver a junction at the right time, but also meet the requirements of that group in terms of pedestrians, cycles, the schools, all the local facilities around it, and also gives the option to consider maybe acquiring some third-party land to make some more improvements that would otherwise not be able. Here just is a quick demonstration of part of California Crossroads. Some of the areas in red show the constraints, and the white lines show that there is quite a lot of movements obviously taking place in this location. We have the shops to the north, the garage to the south. There's a sheltered home to the south as well, and obviously to quite a treaty population area in the east. These are some pictures and demonstrations of some work that the local parish had actually undertaken by visiting an area called Poynton in the north, which looked at some shared schemes and shared pedestrian cycle and vehicle schemes, shared surfacing, and changed the planning materials and the environment of the area to make things a more pleasant and improved area. And as such, in terms of capacity, these schemes have actually been identified to work quite well. So this is a measure that we're looking at the moment, and we're working with a specialist who is coming into the area to identify and progress this on with the council and the parish in the group. Other corridors I've mentioned include the B3030 through Winnish. I mentioned at a previous planning committee that obviously leading up through to Winnish, the council has progressed on with the Hatch Farm Dairy element of phase 1 that's been produced by the developers, and phase 2 the council's progressing. So in this area, the Winnish Relief Road and the options in Winnish are being progressed and will assist obviously with the wider strategic elements. A327 south leading through to Eversley. Hampshire County Council, we've worked quite well alongside them throughout the whole process. They haven't given us an easy ride, I can assure you, and they've assessed everything quite rigorously. However, working with them, it's been identified, and we've identified a range of measures. Only environmental and safety measures are required in terms of capacity. All the junctions that have been assessed by the applicant through the application and through Hampshire County Council have all been agreed and met the requirements. So in terms of Eversley, Hampshire County Council have accepted a financial contribution towards safety and environmental improvements between Eversley, the borough boundary with Wokingham, right down through to the A20 junction and Hertford Bridge Flats. White Horse Lane also, there's been some improvements identified, and these schemes will be delivered and secured via Section 106. We also have the greenways, which run a significant network throughout this development area and lead into the wider borough. 5 additional routes were identified when the Alberfield development came forward, and these are referenced as AR1 through to 5, which are links through to Shinfield, Bark and working Finchampster via California Country Park, California Park via Narmore Ride down through to Park Lane, and then Narmore Ride themselves. These will also link into the development and leads and provide commuting and leisure routes through for all people, including that to the links of the school and the employment within the development site. Public transport. This has been developed between with the developer with a lot of assistance from ourselves and local bus operators who are able to provide us with some significant information. So running through the application, the phasing plan in the bottom corner, which Matt's already demonstrated to you earlier. Phase 1 looks to use the existing services which provide a 20-minute frequency to Reading and 60 minutes to Wokingham. Phase 2 leads on to a 20-minute frequency to Reading, 30 to Wokingham, 60 to Bracknell, with the addition of Bracknell being added to that one. And Phase 3 enhances those further by dropping the frequency to 15 minutes to Reading, 30 staying the same to Wokingham, and then obviously increasing the frequency to Bracknell also. Therefore, in the terms of public transport, we've identified, this is some of the wording extracted from the section 106, which identifies the public transport interchange, which will be located in the district centre, and we've identified the provision of that public transport secured through the section 106. There's also a contribution towards the delivery of that improvement, which may include such things as a micro park on either side, it might be a cycle route, cycle stands and stuff, so people can cycle to the bus, cycle park their bike up safely, and get on the bus to connect through to Wokingham or their final destination. Public transport service improvements include obviously the contribution towards the delivery of the bus phases that I mentioned on the last slide, and the flexibility of that allows obviously us to look at whether there are any improvements through the public transport group, and therefore there has been discussion around a shuttle service obviously that would be dedicated in and out of Wokingham to obviously link up with the trains. And the flexibility there gives us obviously the ability to review that and link that through to the My Journey initiatives as the development commences. We also have the public transport strategy, which talks about linking and assessing each of the public transport elements, and obviously reviewing that as we go through, and that will be appended to the section 106, which identifies all of those routes. Then we have the bus stop contributions and works, and basically that will be that as the development commences, they will be delivering the physical bus stop elements in terms of the curbs, the electrical connections, etc. And then the contribution means that at the point that the bus comes through, the council can deliver the new shelters, the services, the RTI, which is the information for the buses, etc. This plan just shows the existing bus services that run and operate within the area, and then there's a greeny kind of plan, the greeny dotted, the little dots that run through the centre of the site. The star is the district centre, and then we have the potential for coming down the Alfred Costa Relief Road, from on 327, and obviously linking through on the Narmore Ride, also looping through the northern elements of the AGRC application site also. I mentioned My Journey and travel planning. My Journey is an initiative that the council has been operating now for a number of years, and it's been very good through a local grant fund that the council has, and this has been developed on the legacy at the back of that. And what it does is it allows developers typically submit a travel plan, and it would normally run between 5 years, maybe 7, depending on the facilities, the measures and the targets if they're achieved. Now in terms of this one, the council could take it on and we could provide a borough-wide travel planning initiative. Therefore, you could hire a bike, for example, in North Wokingham SDL, and you can cycle it all the way to Ardfield to meet your friends and park it up in the Ardfield SDL. You can use your bus pass to travel on the bus back to the shops. It gives that multiple use, and it gives us the ability to spread the travel planning measures across the borough rather than individual development sites, which developers sometimes can't achieve on a small public development site. With the ability to have such a large amount of 12,000 houses, through My Journey we're also able to negotiate discounts with Network Rail and South West Trains to get discounts from travel for rail, whereas normal travel planning wouldn't be able to obviously achieve such a target. The application as well submitted a travel plan for the school, which is in framework, and so that will be worked up further through the school submission, and also a framework travel plan for the employment, which will be the district centre areas, and that will be again progressed once the end users are identified. In terms of construction traffic, the plan here on the right hand side has been secured from the section 106, and this has identified that all routes that would be in and out of the site are restricted. Therefore, the only routes that would be able to be travelled towards the site would be on the A327 from the north or the south, and from the A327 Arglefield Cost Relief Road once that connects in. Therefore, there's restrictions in place on Barkham, along Biggs Lane leading through to Park Lane, and along Church Road leading out towards the west. The reason for identifying this is obviously there is a lengthy construction period, probably 10 plus years, and therefore we've identified to restrict certain roads of that nature. There's a construction management plan also secured within the planning conditions, which identify a lot of the constraints such as mud, wheel washing, all of those elements to prevent them from impacting upon the public highway. I think I have those back to
Okay, back to me just quickly, just to conclude. Development is policy compliant, and the application is underpinned by a sound environmental statement that demonstrates that we know significant environmental issues. As Chris has just explained, there's a robust environmental transport assessment supporting the application. The master plan is based on a detailed understanding of the site and the character areas design code information, and commitment to meet the council's standards to provide a framework for future reserve matters planning applications. There's no objections from statutory consultees, no significant impact on neighbour amenities, and the applicants have agreed to provide the necessary Section 106 contributions towards infrastructure and services. The officer recommendation is that the planning application should be approved with the conditions in the report and as amended on the update sheet, subject to the Section 106 agreement being completed prior to the council adopting its community infrastructure levy charge on the 6th of April. In terms of conditions, Simon, would you like me to just skim through the update sheet and just explain to you?
I think there's quite a lot of detailed information there that's been provided in advance, so I think that's probably okay now. I think there may be specific items that will come out as part of the member's question that will be worth developing further. Okay. So that concludes the officer presentation on this application. So we now move on to hear from the registered speakers. And first person I think we've got down is from Barkham Parish Council, Ken Lane. Good evening. You take the chair and press the grey button.
Simon, we've got 600 each.
Each parish. Just for clarity, as I say, we normally allow 3 minutes, but because of the size and scale, we're allowing 6 minutes for each of the parishes to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Barkham Parish Council recognises that the current SDL application is much superior to the previous one submitted by AGLC in March 2013. We also appreciate that Crest Nicholson have made a genuine attempt to engage with the local community, which was not done by the previous development team. However, we are mainly concerned that the transport infrastructure will not be adequate, but we're also conscious there's no perfect solution that will please everyone. The local roads were never designed with large-scale housing in mind, and as part of the planning approval, a mitigation obviously is essential to reduce the effect on existing residents. There's also the question of the wider transport issues, which we would hope to discuss. We're working on, and is obviously outside of this planning application. Much is made in the submission of the Garden Village approach to the development, and that's something we think should be applauded, but there needs to be a firm agreement in place with Crest Nicholson to ensure there's no wriggle room for developers of individual packages to depart from this approach over the build-out period to 2026. The new submission has also involved a much better survey of existing trees and the natural environment, which must be retained to form the backbone of the village. We would also expect that as part of any planning approval there should be a firm commitment to make adequate funding available to support the creation of a high-quality greenway system to link the SDL to Barkham Hill and other local communities, and a colleague who will be commenting on that from the secondary school application point of view, which the safe routes both from within the SDL and the wider area. Coming to a slightly more specific thing, We are concerned about the adequate landscaping and housing height along Langley Common Road, and should be properly reflected in the documents before the plan application is approved. The AGLC has acknowledged that this needs to be done, and now view amending the plan documents as a matter of consistency. Describing the northern perimeter character area, stating in the design and access addendum that the boundary to Langley Common Road should be enhanced with new planting to create a country lane character, goes on to suggest a softer feel approaching the countryside in the northeast, and that the edge facing Langley Common Road should present a positive frontage, incorporating tree planting, and we reference here the documents which I could go into separately. However, this is not reflected in the plans document. A dark green strip should be shown along Langley Common Road as indicated for other areas. And similarly, housing height on the periphery of the development should be limited to 2 stories to create the soft edge. Plans document, building story heights parameter plan, also need to be amended so that there is the same treatment for the zones where on the edges of development where there are 2-story housing. I think we're pleased that the role of Langley House is being reconsidered. It does represent the local red brick architectural style characteristic of so much in the area, particularly the water estate. It could be retained as a landmark building at the corner of the development and could also provide additional housing units as conversion would entail subdivision into a number of dwellings. It would also be helpful if AGLC and WBC could indicate what is proposed to the adjacent pond which lies between the SDL boundary and Langley Common Road. Turning quickly to land management, a plan for land management is required as part of the reserved matters. Specifically, the northern part of the site will be the last to be developed. This has a number of large hangar-type buildings, which are very useful if you want to repair chieftain tanks. But without a plan, this area could become derelict and a target for vandalism and other undesirable activities. It's obviously not in the interest of the community, or indeed the developers themselves. This needs a robust management plan agreed as part of any approval process. As part of this process, there is also a need to protect and conserve trees and natural landscape while the land remains undeveloped. Another thing we are concerned about is the name of the community, and that now needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Describing the development as Arborfield Garrison is becoming rather inappropriate and maybe even confusing. It's clear that a new name must be sought. It would be desirable if one is chosen for the whole of the SDL, including the Merino area, and that this should have a local association. AGLC have indicated that we carry out a public consultation on this. DPC would encourage this to be done sooner rather than later. As the SDL involves 2 separate development consortia, it may be appropriate for Woking Borough Council to take the lead. So in summary, Barkham Parish Council acknowledges that the new submission is an improvement over what went before. It is a large and complex site, and the framework given by this submission has to set the scene for the garden village that's been promised. If this submission is approved, we would hope that the dialogue between the developers, Woking Borough Council, the parishes and the wider community continues as the reserved matters come forward for approval.
Okay, thank you, Ken, and within your time, thank you. Now we have 2 speakers from Finchhamshire Parish Council who are going to share your time. We've got Steve Bromley and Lorraine Newcomb.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, Finchhamshire Parish Council acknowledges that Crest Nicholson have worked closely with the Parish Council at steering committee meetings, community forums and various exhibitions held in connection with the progression of this application. Such cooperation has been appreciated and has resulted in a number of our concerns being addressed. However, a few remain, and I will begin with the Part 2 application for full permission for the sands. My fellow Parish Councillor Steve Bromley will address the transport issues subsequently. We are concerned that no car parking has been provided for the Northern Sand. I note the officer's comment that Natural England has agreed that this sand should not have a car park, as its principal purpose is to meet the needs of the development, but it will inevitably attract users from outside, and we would urge that some provision should be made in order to prevent parking on local roads, which will cause a hazard. Car parking is proposed for the West Court Sang, and we feel there is a requirement for some parking to be provided for the Northern Sang. With regard to the West Court Sang, we urge that additional access points should be provided in order to allow non-SDL residents to enter, particularly those coming from Park Lane and New Mill Road. We are pleased to note that one of our other concerns about appropriate hedgerow planting to support native bird species has been agreed. We also note that the existing MOD gym is to be reused for sports community uses. We would hope that this will be made available to the public as soon as possible, as the southern part of Woking is very lacking in such facilities. With regard to the application for outline permission, we fully understand that the fine detail of these areas will be the subject of future applications. We are pleased to note that the Garrison Church will be retained, also the cricket pitch. We do have concerns about the management of the green infrastructure in the future, and note that Section 106 funding will cover its adoption by the Council or some other body nominated by the Council. It's important to local residents that any agreement over this is carefully drawn up. We have submitted comments on the secondary school application, mainly referring to the travel plan and parking at the school, but with some qualification, we were very pleased finally to be getting a secondary school in South Wokingham. Other community facilities to be provided under this plan refer to a skate park, BMX track and a mugger, which are all welcomed, but we would urge the Council to providing facilities for post-adolescents and older members of the community as well, such as an outdoor gym or bowls. We note that Section 106 funding will provide healthcare uses. We trust that this will be a doctor's surgery and possibly a dental surgery, all most important for the new residents of this garden village, particularly if it is intended to be self-sufficient as far as possible. New nurseries will be required, and we would urge the pub should be provided as helping in the creation of a new community. We are very pleased that the developers have recognised the heritage aspects of this site and would urge them to look to the National Trust for inspiration on how to make the most of unique sites such as the Horse Infirmary. We would very much like the Garrison Gates to be retained as another link with the past. We note that a flood risk assessment and drainage strategy has been agreed with the Environment Agency and Council's flood risk officer. Flooding has occurred in this facility in recent times, and we are most concerned that all this new development might cause off-site flooding, and hope that these plans are robust enough to cope with all the runoff which will occur. In an ideal world, Finchhamston Parish Council would not be welcoming 2,000 new dwellings to this area. However, we appreciate that with the departure of the Army and the current state of the housing market, the land must be made use of. It seems that the application, including the provision of new schools and a village centre with a food store, as well as the other facilities mentioned previously, is as good as we could hope it could be. We sincerely hope that Crest Nicholson are able to deliver what they are promising, and that with all the green spaces to be provided, the garden village will be a desirable area to live. Finchhamsted Parish Council will monitor future plans for this site with interest, but in the meantime, we support the application with the above provisos.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Within the developments of the SDL, there's a number of issues that will affect Finchhamsted and its residents, some of which are critical. These include the California Crossroads mitigation, the route and structure of the 9 Mile Ride extension, the junction and crossing between 9 Mile Ride, Park Lane and 9 Mile Ride extension, with the proposed downgrading of access to Park Lane north and south, improvements which we made to Whitehorse Lane and Commonfield Lane, the cycleways running along 9 Mile Ride and also into Wokingham, the creation of a greenways network throughout the site which will link to existing footpaths, bridleways, cycleways and equestrian routes. All of these issues will be subject to further planning applications and subsequent public consultations. However, none of these issues form part of this application. What is to be decided as part of the application is the new site access roundabout on the A327 Reading Road, a new roundabout junction at the intersection of Biggs Lane and Langley Common Road, and various junction upgrades on Biggs Lane. On this basis, we do not have any issues with these plans and we would support this application.
Thank you very much. Now we have that's the only speakers registered from parish councils, so We now come on to members of the public who are going to speak, and again starting with Barkham. Firstly, I invite Fiona Meering and Gordon Dexter. I assume you've come to an arrangement to manage your time between you? You have?
I'm sort of renowned for quantity rather than quality, so I'll let Mr. Dexter go first.
Right, okay. Good evening.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Graham Dexter, and I live in Church Lane, Barkham. I'd like to briefly talk to you about the specific case of Commonfield Lane and how it leads in, traffic moves into Barkham Street and Barkham Ride. The recommendation of the planning group has been to retain Commonfield Lane as a single track road with increased passing, although I have to confess I didn't hear all the comments made in the previous presentation, so I'm going to progress on the assumption that's still the case. However, I'm also aware that there are a number of counter proposals suggesting that Commonfield Lane should be converted into a two-track road, two-way road. If the committee is minded to consider these counter proposals as part of their deliberations, I'd also like to ask them to consider reducing the speed limit in Barkham Ride and Barkham Street from the current 40 miles per hour to 30 miles per hour, supported by appropriate calming measures. These are very fast and dangerous roads. Barkham Ride has narrow blind passing points, and Barkham Street has access issues and in places very, very narrow pavements. Converting Commonfield Lane into a two-way road will increase the volume of traffic down both these roads, and a reduction in the speed limit would help mitigate the adverse impact of these changes, hopefully to the advantage of road safety. Thank you.
4.5 minutes.
I'm sure I'll take it all. During the last decade, the Borough of Workington has experienced some substantial flood events, and unfortunately quite a few of these have been somewhat self-inflicted. As according to government statistics, we have about 5,500 properties at risk of surface water flooding and just over 3,000 at risk of water and river flooding. Now, surface water is unfortunately a function of too many impermeable surfaces and inadequate drainage, and we really do want to avoid this with every new development, particularly as surface water flooding does compound river flooding. I therefore ask in a bid to protect both current and new Workingham residents that you add in or alter the existing conditions to cover the points I'm going to raise. And I think you've all received my quantity version of this text in an email in the last week. I think it's worth observing at this point that what I'm seeking is actually fairly generic and really needs to be considered into every application. And to that end, I think WBC need to be looking at augmenting their drainage and flooding department so that they get more people like Eddie, particularly Chloe and Julia, so that we can get a really good detailed understanding of the development so that they don't pose a flood risk. So number one, hydrological and hydrogeological, I'm saying that really nervous, studies need to be carried out over a substantive period of time, ideally including a period of flooding and over a wide area of the development. And these studies should then be determined should be used to determine where the subs should be deployed and when and what type of maintenance needs to be carried out. Now, you do need to remember that this site is predominantly London clay and often has a very high water table, so infiltration is a problem. The maintenance of the subs, there does need to be worked out before as a condition, to work out where they should be deployed, what maintenance is required, and very, very importantly, how the maintenance is going to be funded for the lifetime of the development. I think that because of the subs and SADS problems with government at the minute, we're not careful with building ourselves up a whole load of flooding problems in the future through subs. There also needs to be funding set aside to retro-engineer failing subs. For example, balancing ponds. Even with regular maintenance, balancing ponds will fail over time, and our local Woos Hill pond is a case in point. This is not cheap to rectify. And unless funding is specified in conditions before any build starts, WBC will end up paying substantial bills in the future. Betterment is viewed as something of a swear word in the world of flooding, but if planned in at the outline stage, it does not need to affect the developer's bottom line. And this needs to be embedded into the condition so that we can get betterment without affecting profit. I think it is also very important that we set up, or the conditions require, the setting up of a resident liaison group to work with WBC, the developer and the Environment Agency throughout the process of the development. I mean, quite honestly, this is a win-win situation, because residents can actually feel some confidence that conditions are going to be deployed exactly as specified, and the developer has an opportunity to develop a good working relationship with those that they're going to be working with for a long period of time. Unusually, I'm actually going to put my Barkham hat on now, being a Barkham resident. I think with the increased traffic flows, both the peak rates, I've got flooding in there as well, so the peak flows down Barkham Road are going to increase because of this development. And I do watch every morning with the children trying to cross the roads, at Wokingham Borough children crossing roads to catch local schools. I think there needs to be some consideration about putting crossings in so our children aren't endangered. Thank you.
Thank you. Now come on to the public speakers from Finchhamstead. I've got Mr Slater and Nicola Greenwood. I see Nicola, is Mr Slater here?
I'm speaking for him, son.
That's fairly unorthodox, Philip.
I'm sorry, he's lambing at the moment.
Sorry?
He's lambing at the moment. He can't
Okay,
hear.
so you'll be speaking as a Finchhamstead resident, although you're
I'm
an Elmslie
speaking
resident.
as an appointee of Mr Slater, so it's
Okay,
his,
all right.
his word.
Okay, fine. Okay, Nicola, will you kick off first?
Yeah, I've got some photos somewhere, which we're going to go whilst I'm talking, if that's all right.
Right, okay. Just a minute, let's make sure we've got photos before
Thank you.
we start.
Do you want to start the clock yet?
No. Okay.
Okay. Good evening and thank you for allowing me to speak. Firstly, I would like to talk about White Horse Lane. I refer to the Council's White Horse Lane report October 14, which was released March 15. It showed that there is a genuine cause for concern. By 2026, the traffic flow along White Horse Lane and Church Lane South is set to increase by approximately 500% to over 200 cars at rush hour alone. The recommendations the report suggests are to try and lessen the flow largely with signage, advertising the lane as a single track road and giving Church Lane South and East a 6'6" width restriction. It is estimated this will cost around £30,000. Even with this mitigation, the 2026 traffic figures only drop slightly and White Horse Lane will still carry 40% more traffic than Park Lane. The developers plan to improve Park Lane to reduce its traffic flow. The model shows this will be successful. White Horse Lane is currently enjoyed by many local users, walkers, cyclists and horse riders. Without something more significant in place to prevent this dramatic increase in traffic, White Horse Lane will be very dangerous and completely lost as a recreational amenity. I appeal to you to ensure the protection of White Horse Lane. The report suggestions are based around allowing legitimate traffic continued uninterrupted use. The only way I believe this could be maintained is for White Horse Lane and Church Lane to be given except for access status. If you approve this application, please could you make it a condition of approval that the developers incorporate this except for access status into their plans. I would also like to ask you to keep in mind the needs of horse riders. I refer to the most recent proposed linkages strategy map dated January 15. I'm concerned that each time this map is reviewed, another bridleway is removed. This time it's the Park Lane bridleway link, which is also a ROIT. I'm also concerned that most of the routes shown are in fact along existing roads, 9 Mile Ride included. These photos were taken yesterday at Maidenhead Jubilee River Route and the surrounding area where they have extensive multi-user routes which include horse riders. There are 2,228 horses registered to owners living within the Woking Borough. These horses contribute £12 million per annum to the local economy. A survey conducted September to December 14 showed that without an increase in the number of safer off-road routes for riding, 86% of riders will consider moving their horse out of the borough to find livery. This would mean a loss of £10.5 million per annum to the local economy. If you plan to approve this application, I ask you to please add a condition that ensures all bridleway and multi-user routes are a condition of approval, that the opportunity is not missed for the greenways and roads on the WBC wish list to be included within the development. Also that horse riders are included in the use of these routes where off-road pathways are so desperately needed. Finally, that any bridleway, greenway or cycle routes following the route of a road are over the hedge. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. I think there's some slight issues at the start with your slides, but I think they got there in the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Philip.
Thank you, Chairman.
My name is Philip Todd, and I've been appointed by Mr. Slater to speak on his behalf this evening because he's fully involved in lambing at his farm at the moment. MJ Slater runs a successful agricultural engineering business from his offices at number 1 Reading Road, Finchampstead. Like all local businesses, he relies on the public highway network to provide access for his staffs, customers and clients. From his first floor office, he can see traffic on the A327, both in Finchampstead and on the Blackwater Bridge, which is the county boundary. He witnesses cars having to mount the pavement or drive onto his forecourt because articulated vehicles need to use the full width of both carriageways to negotiate the tight bend outside his premises. He sees the traffic conflicts due to cars and vans having to cede access to HGVs due to the restricted width of the bridge. He can also see that the Tally-Ho junction already functions at peak hours as a courtesy junction, that is one where drivers cede their right-of-way so as to allow others to move. The traffic forecasts that accompanied the application indicate that during the AM peak, without the Arborfield Garrison developments, the A327 will be running at up to 75% of its theoretical free flow capacity. It is estimated that the traffic generated by the SDL would add about 10% to that figure, i.e. a further 7.5% of the highway capacity. That is 7.5% out of the 25% spare capacity that would be available. For the highway network to function, there need to be gaps in the traffic. Gaps are needed so that drivers wishing to turn off the road across oncoming traffic or drivers wishing to join the road can do so. Gaps are needed to allow articulated vehicles to negotiate the corner and to allow vehicles to give way to HGVs on the bridge. The figures show that the traffic generated by the Arborfield SDL will occupy 30% of that spare capacity. This is bound to lead to increased delays caused by conflicted traffic movements.
30 seconds.
The simple maths is 70% of the gaps means 43% more queuing. From a layman's point of view, and from his personal knowledge, Mr. Slater cannot understand how the highway's function and capacity cannot be seriously impaired by a calculated 30% loss in spare capacity at the AM peak due to the Arborfield Garrison development. Nor can he understand why Wokingham Borough's highway officers are fully aware of these figures have sought no contribution to any highway improvements on the A327 outside his premises.
Thank you very much. Now we come on to those under the category of supporters, which is normally the applicant and their agents. So, not sure, we have Hugo Reid, Chris Tinker and Phil Hamshaw. I don't know whether you're planning to share your time or measure it out. Right? Okay, we'll keep it just you. Right, okay. Good evening.
Thank you, everyone. We've had some excellent and comprehensive presentations, so I will not repeat everything and try and keep this short. On behalf of Crest and the DIO, we do have a big note of thanks to all the officers, members, parish councils and members of the public that have engaged over the last, over the last 2 years, frankly. There has been a lot of positive momentum gathered in the last 6 months especially, and that has come from a lot of people's hard work and time put into this. And we feel that there is the beginnings here of a good, real community partnership, that this is only the beginning of. And we intend for there to be a longer journey of this and for this positive momentum to continue. You've heard about the benefits of the scheme. We won't go into those other than just to say that there are a few more unusual benefits, perhaps more bespoke to this particular scheme, that are benefits for wider use outside of the scheme. And just several points. Firstly, there is a significant amount of public open space which is more than, significantly more than on average similar sized developments. The public open space being put forward is 153 acres or 62 hectares. And that is new public open space, which is about 50% of the entire development, and that will be protected. Secondly, you've heard about the new community facilities being put forward and the new village centre. Obviously, this won't just serve the existing community or the existing, serve the proposed community. It will also serve the existing community and immediate surroundings for such matters as the secondary school. This also secures, as we've heard, numerous road and transport improvements, much of which is actually to be delivered in the early stages of the development and somewhat prior to when technically they may need to be delivered. We are delivering them earlier than that. This is a technically robust application, as we've heard. All objections have been lifted from the EA and from Natural England. There is a robust tree survey and there's a robust environmental assessment. There is also, as you've heard, a robust transport assessment that has taken into consideration the entire traffic from the entire road network and the cumulative impacts of all the SDLs over a 15-year period. It has even taken a conservative approach that people will not so much travel by public transport but will travel by car, and so we have taken a cautious approach to that modelling. Lastly, Crest Nicholson have a legal obligation as development manager to be around and to be delivering this for the next 10 plus years. We will be the custodian of this garden village vision that we have and we share with Wokingham. And this will be a longer journey to come, and we hope that the spirit of community engagement, we will certainly work hard to continue. So if this is a technically robust application, we have officers' recommendation and a full commitment from ourselves and the landowners, the DIO, to move forward to deliver this vision. We urge the members to resolve to grant these proposals to allow us to move forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And then finally we have two borough councillors who are all members registered to speak. Firstly, can I call Arthur Phil, because we're doing it in alphabetical order, Gary Cowan. Hi Gary.
Squeeze it there. Thank you very much, everybody. What I do is I'd like to start by thanking the officers and the developers for the level of consultation they engaged in. And particular thanks must go to, I don't normally name people, but I will, Tracy Coleman and Matthew Melville, for the superb efforts in working the residents, parish councils and resident action groups via the steering groups and public forums. For the benefit of their members, my comments overall on the planning application are on pages 48 to 50. What I would say is, in a utopian society, I believe this planning application would probably be refused. But in the real world, with all its pressures, it's a very different matter. The combination of the MOD vacating the garrison and the last Labour government's South East plan to allow housing there changed all of that. And what was left now was to ensure that a sustainable quality development was delivered that met the needs of existing and future residents. I do welcome the Garden Village principle plan for the site, and I would add that many of the proposals within the report are very good, but I do have some reservations which I hope the Planning Committee will address. Reading all the comments submitted, it's fairly obvious residents have concerns with flooding, traffic and healthcare, to name but three, but I found some of the officer responses could have been more detailed if that were possible, and in a way that was reliant more on the detail rather than trust in the conditions. healthcare is one area where I know very little about. I'm becoming a user now, but that's probably the sign of misspent youth. But my local GP was saying that, in his opinion, the medical facility available that would be available only met half the needs of the residents that the site would develop. And if one thinks of that, one has to consider the impact of the numbers we'll have on the Royal Berkshire Hospital. One could take all the SDLs into consideration here. I don't know if that point will be looked at or has been looked at. The areas I would actually ask the Planning Committee to look at in terms of conditions are the following. The summary refers to up to 2,000 houses, but that reference changes in other parts of the report. So I would ask that a condition or some comment be made to emphasise it is up to 2,000 houses and not that. Individual parcels of land have housing numbers assigned to them, and I would ask that the maximum numbers on each parcel of land is also conditioned so as to ensure wholesale changes to the allocation by having to shoehorn in houses into other areas if unidentified future constraints evolve on any of the parcels of land, which has happened elsewhere and where no such condition existed. Woking has a poor history of adopting sites, but I recognise it's not of their making, but there are examples of sites not being fully adopted after 10 years. And we're up to 2,000 houses planned, plus another 1,500 at a later date at Hogwood. It is essential that the existing and new residents don't have to live in a 25 to 30-year-old unadopted building site. So a condition is required to put phased adoption into the plan. Past history of the Planning Committee imposing conditions on development for officers to change them at a later date has created many problems for all of us in the past. And for that reason I would suggest that any condition imposed should only be changed with the approval of the Planning Committee, or at least the chairman of the Planning Committee, who ideally might ask for an input from local members. And I would earnestly ask the Planning Commission to approve these 4 conditions if it is the intention to approve this planning application. In addition, I would like to ask you publicly to support the establishment of a formal residents liaison group involving all interested parties who would meet at fixed, frequent intervals designed to continue the good work done in the past by the steering group and the public forums. The Loddon Valley Residents Association is an excellent example of how these groups can work. And I thank Hugo Reid for his comments because it would indicate that he would support that approach. The secondary school is referred to within the planning application, although it's being determined later. And I've made comments which I'd ask members on page 191 to 193 to read also. The key point I've highlighted is that the construction of the school by 2016, along with the ongoing housing and other construction works while the school is active, raises concerns about access, ventilation, noise and others impacting on the school. What I would like to see is a condition that during the initial phases, school transport is used for all children travelling to the school, whether they are within the 3-mile radius or not. And within 6 to 12 months, like I did with Simon at the Coons, the travel plan is reviewed with the chairman of the planning committee and the other officers or people involved. I think... Can
I ask you to wrap up now, Gary?
Okay, I would like to ask the planning committee. I would say to all then, the amended planning update, paragraph 33, and the final 2 pages relating to the school, I think are well written and well thought. And thank you all very much.
Thank you, Gary. Can I now call Ian Pittock, member for Finchington South?
Good evening, fellow members. As some of you know, hopefully all you know, I'm double-hatted as I also sit on the Finchampstead Parish Council. Like my colleagues on that council, I would like to support the view, and also Gary said a few moments ago, that no one really wanted 13,000 houses dumped on the borough. But we certainly needed a large number of houses, and preferably in a contained environment so that suitable infrastructure could be provided. This large, brown and park greenfield site is just too good to turn down. Our residents' children need these houses in order to make their future homes. The wider community needs the infrastructure facilities that are built into the plan. This is more than a reasonably good plan, but I accept that it is not perfect and the conditions for implementing are not perfect either. The developer, in association with WBC, could work on the plan for another 2 years or even more, and it would still not be perfected enough to satisfy everyone. Given this is an MOD-sponsored application, I couldn't avoid making a military anecdote. You know. Having already postponed the Normandy invasion for 24 hours, late in the evening of 4th of June 1944, Montgomery, as the invasion force commander, was asked by Eisenhower if the order should be given to invade on the 6th, even though the conditions were far from perfect. Monty, who also knew the plan itself had some flaws, said, and I'll paraphrase, "If we wait for the perfect conditions, we'll never go. I say, go, go." As to this application, I hear people say there are problems with the off-site roads, and I entirely agree. However, as you've heard from some others, off-site traffic issues will be dealt with by WBC making area-wide improvements, using some developer contributions, rather than being left to the developer to deal with on a smaller, localised basis. There is much work to be done beyond this planning application. I have worked with Nicola Greenwood, whom you heard from earlier, and a traffic expert, to put in place an initial plan for White Horse Lane. We will take this work forward, but as you heard from Nicola, we do need the S106 funds to make it. I'm also chairing the California Crossroads Working Group, which is bringing in a world-renowned expert to help us. I assure you there will be plenty of opportunity for public consultation. There has to be. It is too important not to have significant public contribution. If we don't go with this application now, the developer will appeal and certainly win the case, in my view. This will be at great financial cost to WBC and all residents. It will also sour relations with the developer, with which we must work closely with over the next 15 to 20 years. This loss of a good working relationship will come at a very high price indeed. It is not a perfect plan, and the implementation conditions are not perfect either. They could never be, but I feel they are good enough to move forward. Like Monty, that most cautious, and some might say over-cautious of commanders, I say, go, go.
Thank you, Ian. So that concludes all those registered to speak. And normally at this stage we would go on to discuss firstly the local ward members and then the rest of the committee. I think since there have been a lot of issues raised and this is a big application, I think it would be useful if we address some of the points that were raised by these speakers in the first place to get some clarity, which may well help members in due course. Bob, did you have a specific point you wanted to raise? That?
Yeah, it's a matter of clarification really, because Gary's nicked a couple of my questions already. It's the 2,000 houses, then on clarification on whether it's up to or circa, because circa's either side of that, and also precisely what are we looking at in the outline as opposed to the reserved matters.
We'll cover that.
Thank you.
Right, I've made some notes as we've gone through. I think a particular point that was made by Barkham Parish was the issue about having only two-storey dwellings around the periphery of the site. Matt, could I ask you to comment on that?
I think it's important to understand that the parameter plans are maximum parameters. So along that boundary it shows up to 3 storeys, and the plans have been informed by the landscape and visual impact assessment provided with the application. But by being up to 3 storeys doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be confronted with a block of 3-storey development on that boundary. Within the design access statement addendum, the document identifies how different parts of the site have different characters, identifies particularly on the village edge, development should be more broken up, of a lower scale. So we expect to see that the recommendations of that document incorporated in the reserve matters applications when they came forward.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, I think the other issues we were particularly condensing them by the areas now with Barkham was the issue of flooding and the importance of flood maintenance or drainage maintenance. But obviously that's got to be balanced against the fact that we have a very clear indication of support here from the Environment Agency, the statutory body. Could you comment on that, please?
Yes, I draw members' attention to condition 42, which is a very long condition about surface water flooding with 10 sub-points to it. Within that, Part G talks about an understanding of the seasonal variation of groundwater levels having been considered in the sizing and location of such features. And Part J talks about requirement for when details come forward, going to include full details of maintenance and or adoption proposals, agreements for development covering all aspects of the proposed drainage systems, with provision for annual inspection reports to be submitted to the local authority for any sites that we retain to pipe management companies. So I think those 2 conditions deal with the particular issues that Fiala raised about groundwater and issues about maintenance and adoption going forward.
Okay, thank you. We also heard from Mr. Dexter about particularly keen on reduction in speed limits, but I think that was off-site, Chris, so that's not something we could really consider as part of this application. Could you confirm that?
Yeah, that's correct. Just, I think you mentioned a couple of points as well about safety, and obviously the application does look at personal injury accidents. And in the Barkham Ride, well, there's a couple of ways actually. I think you've got on Barkham Ride, Comfort Lane, and Barkham Street, there were only 3 slight personal injury accidents recorded, obviously by the police in a 5-year period, and therefore the results of those obviously indicate that there isn't a highway safety issue. Again, on Barkham Ride, there was a few slight incidences, and therefore there's no identified reason for obviously a speed reduction in that area, although it's not to say that one doesn't need to be looked at perhaps in the future.
Just for clarity, because it's off-site, that means it's a matter that could be considered completely outside of this meeting if there was something that there was sufficient local support for, and very importantly, police support for, because there's no point in imposing lower speed limits if the police aren't prepared to enforce them. The other part, I think, that was mentioned there was the issue about Commonfield Lane, and confirmed that the current proposal is that Commonfield Lane has some passing places introduced, so it wasn't going to become what I call a conventional width 2-lane road.
Yes,
that's right. Okay, fine. Then we heard from Mr. Todd acting on behalf of Mr. Slater about congestion at the junction of the Tally-Ho, the Reading Road, sorry, the Fleet Hill, the Telling Road, at the Tally-Ho junction, and also Barkham Bridge. Could you comment on that? Because obviously we did hear a number of comments about the existing traffic problem and the fact that it is a requirement. We can't require developers to fix existing problems, only to address and mitigate against any additional problems that a development may create.
Yep. There's a number of points obviously in the report that indicate obviously this junction, whilst on the boundary with Wokingham and Hampshire. Hampshire, as I say, did actually request a larger extent, included all of the Eversley area right the way down to the A30, including obviously a little bit further. The assessments that went through, the Tally-Ho junction has been assessed obviously in base year, future year, and including development and there are no capacity constraints. Again, in terms of, and that's been fully supported by Hampshire, who obviously are the highways authority for Eversley. And in terms of looking at the accident data, there's been one accident in the last 5 years at the Tally-Ho junction, which is recorded as slight, and one on the bridge. But in terms of, from speaking with Hampshire, the corridor through Eversley, whilst obviously it does vary in width and there are obviously some natural constraints, that does obviously aid in natural traffic calmer. And Hampshire are obviously fully aware of that and agree with that approach. However, it's a significant contribution towards improvements between that area down to the A30 have been identified and secured by Hampshire to improve safety and environmental improvements within the Eversley village.
So just to get clarity, the comments from Hampshire County Council are they have no objections subject to a contribution towards environmental and safety improvements along the A327 between the county boundary and the A30, and that is included in section 106.
That's included, it's secured.
Yeah, thank you. The next point I think was those made by Nicola Greenwood about particularly horse access. Number of horses in Wokingham Borough. Glad they're not all out on the road at the same time. It's definitely a traffic calming measure. Could we talk about, Matt, I'm sure it would be Matt or Chris, about the greenways and whether they will be available, because they're quite extensive. And to the best of my knowledge, having been involved in all the other strategic development locations, this is the first time that we've had greenways featuring as such a significant feature of the development. And they are quite significant in distance. What is the status in terms of which categories of users will be able to use that? Could we also just understand a little bit more about the proposals for White Horse Lane and the idea that it should be restricted for access only?
In terms of the greenway, it's up here on the screen. They are allowed for equestrian use. And in this area, we've looked at a number of elements in terms of surfacing. In terms of here, we weren't looking at the full metal surface, so therefore we were looking at timber edge and hogging, which is more in keeping with kind of the rural area. And I know obviously from our team talking to equestrian users, that's more preferred than a typical metal surface such as a carriageway. In terms of the White Horse Lane, you're correct, a study was undertaken. And in terms of the application we had in front of us, we've got the funding has been secured through Section 106. Now again, the developer was going to deliver those schemes, but we felt it was best, obviously, to bring them in-house, like California Crossroads, to have conversations with locals, to understand, obviously, what's required. And as such, I think there's about 5 identified schemes, such as the one from Church Lane to Swallowfield, and obviously through to White Horse Lane as well. And that contribution has been brought together, so therefore, if one scheme is slightly more expensive than the other, we've got the part of flexibility to obviously deliver the best improvement we can.
And what about White Horse Lane and this issue about it being restricted access?
Well, that, I think, under the same principle, when we look at that design of what we're going to put through there, then we can take that view as to doing that.
Right, then the points raised by the ward members, just for clarity, Gary Cowan draw our attention to the fact that the report generally refers to up to 2,000, but in one location it refers it to 2,000. For absolute clarity and avoidance of any doubt, it is up to 2,000 houses. If there's any further point to make on that. And the other issue, I think, was the issue about phasing and the maximum numbers per phase. Is that something we can explore?
Yes, Simon, the parameter plans, one of the parameter plans is density. So it identifies that within each parcel, what the maximum density of development will be in that parcel. As the size of the parcel is limited, and the density of the parcel is limited, that naturally limits the number of units that can go within that parcel. So there's therefore no risk that if the developer finds that one part of the site can't be developed, then we have to pile lots of houses on another part instead, because the maximum parameters are agreed through the planning application and assessed through the environment statement.
Okay. And the other points he raised were that relating to a liaison group and a requirement that the planning conditions would not be variable. In my capacity as chairman, I will confirm that if this planning application is approved tonight with the conditions, there will not be variations to those conditions unless myself and the head of planning are involved in those. And I would like to think that if a liaison group could be established, that any of those that we thought of concern would also be shared with the liaison group to get appropriate local support and feedback. I have personal experience of the liaison group, as I think as does Philip Todd. The large-scale gravel extraction along the Blackwater Valley on the boundaries of Finchester and Eversley. For more than, I think it's probably more than 15 years, there's been a liaison group set up at the start, which basically brought together the quarry companies, local residents, local representatives, to ensure that the initial teething issues that come with any new proposals and developments were ironed out. It also establishes appropriate contacts between all of those people, so that if you have an issue of lorries being routed down the road, there shouldn't be, you know, who to phone up to talk to about it to get it resolved. And I would certainly be very keen and be interested in Hugo, from the applicant, would you be prepared to indicate at this stage that you'd be fully supportive of setting up a informal liaison group to ensure that residents' concerns continue to be sensibly voiced to you and addressed, just as I hope they've been during the consultation period?
Yes, we would do that as a matter of course anyway.
Okay, thank you. So I think that just leaves the, I think we've covered those 2 points. So, and then Ian Pittock gave us a very clear message, I think, on that one. So. All right, so that is the end of the say of all those who have registered to speak. We're now turning over to the members of the Planning Committee, and it is customary that if a member of the Planning Committee actually also sits as a ward member for an application, that they're invited to talk first. So I should be going firstly to John Kaiser, who is the ward member for Barkham. John, straight to you.
Thank you, Simon. Arborfield Garrison, it's a bit of a misnomer because 80% of it's in Barkham. And you may, and as Simon's explained, I'm the ward member for Barkham. Before the questions, I'd just like to make a few comments. We've heard that this is the second application submitted to the council for this site, as the original was not considered to be of an acceptable standard. I believe this application, on the face of it, offers a much more design-orientated development. As the chairman said, I am the member for Barkham. I'm also on the Arborfield Parish Council, and I'm going to let the cat out of the bag now. I'm also the executive member for Highways and Planning. And on top of that, I live 300 yards from the garrison. So you can well imagine that I want to see the very best development possibly delivered for the residents. That said, though, there are a number of questions that need to be asked, and I've grouped them into 3 areas. First is highway and traffic.